I've always got something. If I'm not, even if I'm not actually doing anything, if I'm just sitting, I'm thinking.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Island Influencers. My guest today is an entrepreneur, a multiple business owner, a professional, and also a community leader. I refer to, of course, Dave McLean, who is one of the key people behind the Peel Centenary Centre and behind the successful Our Island, Our World festival held in 2019, but sadly not this year due to current circumstances. Or is it? Make sure you listen to the end to hear what Dave's current thinking is on the festival and also to learn all about him and hear his story. Let's kick off and let's find out all about you. Where were you born, David?
I was born in the Jane Crookall Maternity Hospital. The first 7 years of my life, I was brought up in Laxey. My dad's family come from Laxey. I think back to 1500 in the old Lonnan records. Our family goes back there.
Gosh.
We're Killips and Mucktons. Even though my name is McClean. So, yes, I spent the first 7 years at Laxey. My dad was a teacher at Laxey School.
Okay, primary school teacher, obviously.
Primary school teacher, that's right. He became headmaster of the little school up on the hill at Morown.
Oh, gosh, yes. The
language centre.
Yes, I know. It's not far from where I am at the moment.
All right.
Yes, it's quite an iconic building, that, isn't it? At the top of the hill. Can you imagine being a school child in Morown and having to walk up that?
4 times a day.
Yes.
For some reason, and I never worked out why, we always used to come back down at lunchtime. And I can't remember how that happened because presumably my father was on, dinner duty and that sort of thing, because there was only 2 teachers. But I remember going backwards and forwards twice. So I must have been very fit by the end of it.
Oh, indeed.
The thing I most remember about that school is having to break the ice in the toilets outside in the winter.
Gosh, I think we've moved on a little bit now. School children today can be very grateful. Yes, I remember at Albert Road School was similar outdoor loos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
So I stayed there till I was about 11 or 12. We actually moved to Crosby then.
Yes. And
lived on the main road at Crosby, and then moved back to Douglas, and then I spent the rest of my time on the island at Ballabruie. Me and Greg Jocken in the same, sort of more or less next door to each other. Elaine Kane was up at the top of the road. Elaine, who was the manager of the Isle of Man Bank here in Peel.
Yes, gosh.
It was lovely actually.
Yeah, it sounds it. So you went to Ballacameen and St Ninians, did you?
Yeah, exactly. There again, it was sort of very good because, of course, Ballacameen was just up the road from Ballabruie. Yeah. And then when I went to St Ninians, I remember going on my bike. And then I got a motorbike when I was 16. And in fact, I must be one of the few amateurs who've ever been on the TT without actually being a proper rider. Because I was doing my A-levels and my head must have been sort of scrambled after this exam. Because I came out of the front door of St Ninians, got on my motorbike, went out through onto Bray Hill, down Bray Hill, and then I thought, well, this is strange, seeing all these people either side of the road. And the next thing I know, I see this policeman down at the bottom of Bray Hill with his eyes out on stalks, looking at this little chap on his little motorbike coming down. And all of a sudden, this TT rider comes flying past me, and I got sort of dragged off the course at the bottom of Bray Hill. And as you can imagine, given a huge talking to.
Oh my God, that could have been a disaster, but what a story. Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, that's to have been able to get on the course. I suppose a learning point from that might have been to
close the gates or never bother thinking that nobody would be stupid enough to do it.
Well, I know what you mean.
Throughout my life, I've managed to find plenty of stupid things to do. That was
Yeah, but I mean, who would be stupid enough in the first place to put on, O levels, GCSEs, A levels in TT fortnight? Come on. Where the Isle of Man is and what goes on. So yeah, gosh, that's amazing. So do you think? What did your mum do?
My mum was a shop manager. She managed Sarah's for Jaeger, which was for many years was on Nelson Street. Mm-hmm. And then the shop was bought by another lady and it was moved up to Port Jack. So my mum worked there. She was well in her 70s when she retired. I mean, she's still with us now, bless her. She's be 99 in a few months. She just lives a few hundred yards around the corner from me.
Yeah.
But that meant that my gran looked after me when I was about 3.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing for me. I loved my gran. At one time, she was the oldest lady on the island. She was 106 when she died.
Gosh.
And she was a fabulous piano player. And so from the age of 3, I had piano lessons with my gran.
Yeah.
And that stayed with me all my life, really.
I'm sure.
So, so one of the most important things that ever happened to me, really, getting those lessons early on from my gran and getting a love of music.
That's wonderful. So what sort of music avenues did she take you down at that stage?
A wonderful Chopin pianist. She could knock out Chopin nocturnes in her 90s, which would bring you to tears. She was amazing. I've still got her Royal Academy of Music certificates that I think they were about 1912, something like that. These days you get sent something through the internet. It's a sort of a bit of A4, and if you're lucky, it's got a signature on it.
Yeah.
These things had these wonderful sort of flowery designs around the outside, and it was all this wonderfully verbose sort of text about how marvellous you are and all this sort of business.
Yeah, handwritten calligraphy, I suppose.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Most beautiful sort, yeah.
So that's something really important that I've managed to keep. And another important thing, possibly the only other important thing I've got, is a load of postcards that my granddad sent back to my grandmother. This is my dad's mother and father in the First World War. And they're beautifully embroidered. Yeah. And I think it's quite a sort of a thing in those days. I think there were people who embroidered these postcards and then they were given to the soldiers so that they could send them back to their sweethearts and everything. And I've got the whole pile of those. And,
it's lovely memorabilia, isn't it? Wonderful. Yeah, that's amazing. Oh, lovely. So how did you get on to what did you study at A levels, and did you did you have an idea of what you were going to go into? I mean, most people will know that you went into pharmacy.
I was planning to become a doctor, actually.
All right.
And I was about 16 and I went to see my GP about something, I can't remember what, but Dr. Beckett, who lived on Hawarden Avenue. And he must have been having a bad day or something, because I think he asked me what you're planning to do, and I said to him, I think I'm going to have a bash at doing what you're doing. And he sort of said, whatever you do, don't do that. He said, become a pharmacist, you'll earn much more money and you won't have work half the hours. As it turned out, of course, all that sort of thing all disappeared, because in those days they were all single practices and they would do their own night calls and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Nowadays it's all changed. But, at one time, I did sort of think briefly when I was about 30 about going back to uni to do medicine again. More or less the same week, we found out that my wife was pregnant with our first child. Oh, so that sort of changed my mind anyway. So,
yeah, sure.
And I ended up staying in pharmacy.
Yeah.
But so that's why I did it. I had no background in pharmacy. I had no relatives in pharmacy or anything like that. I knew precious little about it, to be honest.
Yeah. So if you're bright and you go to university, applied yourself in those subjects, then
the world's
your oyster.
Yeah, I just often think, sort of, it might have been more fun to have done humanities and that sort of thing. But without a doubt, if you want to earn sort of a reasonable amount of money and have a secure future, you're better off doing something that has a defined job at the end of it. And pharmacy, is certainly one of those things.
Yeah, and how did you go about setting it up in a small business format? I mean, it's quite one thing to be an employee, but quite another to have your own business and then.
Yeah, well, I'd done my training with Boots.
Yeah.
And then I got offered a job by Alan Lloyd, who's got a house on the island, actually. I don't know whether you know Alan. He doesn't spend much time over here.
Right.
But at that time, which was about 1974, he'd got one shop and he was just buying his second shop. And he applied for another pharmacist and I got the job.
Right.
And I went to work for Alan. And
so it must have been the very start of his empire.
It was the very beginning. He only had one at that time. He had two shops then. He worked in one shop, I worked in another shop.
Right.
And he taught me loads. I've always got on great with him, and I admire him immensely, really, because he was a guy, sort of who started off from reasonable, sort of
self-made,
normal middle class sort of beginnings, and of course made an absolute fortune. And good luck to him. And I think probably I could see the way the wind was blowing, that I didn't really want to be involved in I was a director of the company, but with a very small shareholding. But I could see the way it was going, and I could see that Alan wanted to expand, and I wasn't really interested in that sort of thing. So, but I'd seen that it's not exactly rocket science to set up your own business, especially in something like pharmacy, which is, to be honest, you've got to be pretty poor at the job to, fail completely. So I bought my first shop in 1981.
Yeah.
And, sort of never regretted it, actually.
Yeah.
That was in Wolverhampton.
Right. So how many did you build up to in the end?
Only 7.
Right.
Which was ample, And in fact, it ended up being too many because, that took me, and I brought in another guy who I'd been friendly with at Boots. So we built this up together, really.
Yeah.
And we got to 7, and we had some fabulous staff, and we had some dreadful managers.
Right. I was going to say the people management across 7 branches would have been quite a challenge. Yeah.
Well, the staff were absolutely wonderful, but the trouble is, of course, managers, you're employing out of a very small pool with pharmacists, because you've obviously got to have pharmacists as managers.
Okay.
And frankly, the majority of them just didn't certainly live up to my expectations as to what I expected. And I got progressively more and more disillusioned with the idea of, running that sort of business. So
what did you do next?
Well, we came back to the island. My partner and myself sort of effectively said, I've had enough of this. And he'd never been to the island. And so I said, well, I'd actually seen a pharmacy for sale. And I said, what, I fancy getting out of this. And there's a pharmacy for sale in the Isle of Man. I think I might go back home. And he said, I might, that sounds interesting. And funnily enough, both shops in Peel became for sale at the same time.
Gosh, so did he buy one, you buy the other, or did you bought
we bought
together?
Them, yes, we bought them. And we ran those 2 shops then from 91 right through till 2006.
Yes.
It was wonderful, actually, because we also brought in the chap who owned one of the shops in Peel to work for us. So the 3 of us worked together, and we all did 4 days each.
That's nice balance.
It was a marvellous work-life balance, and it meant that you could really enjoy your job, and you could really, once again, I was back in a position where I felt that I was able to do the best job for my patients, whereas when we had the shops in England, I just didn't feel that, so it was so lovely to be back.
Yeah, real community sort of work.
Well,
really.
Just doing the
it's
job,
a hub of the community, isn't it, the pharmacy?
Well, that's right. Yeah. I spent hours after work delivering prescriptions and that sort of business. And,
yeah, sure.
As best I could, do the job as well as I could, and of course, much more satisfying.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have been the first pharmacist to have gone into politics. on the
That's
Isle
funny,
of Man.
yeah.
But was that something you ever
never appealed to me? Never ever appealed to me. I don't know anything about it. Not from what I can see when I look at some of these politicians, that they know much about it either. I think I might, without wishing to sound boastful, I might have had the humility to know that I didn't know enough, right. And wouldn't inflict my left-wing views on the Manx public anyway. I'm sure most of them wouldn't elect me anyway.
Well, you never know, do you? But yes, it doesn't sound like it's going to be an ambition, so I wouldn't worry too much.
No.
Focus on things that you enjoy doing.
That'll never happen. Feel to relax.
Yeah, no, great. So
Harmer and Jeff Boot are safe from me.
Yeah. So when you sold the pharmacy, then what happened after that?
Are we talking about on the Isle of Man? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, on the Isle of Man.
Yeah, we sold them in 2006, as I said, and me and my business partner, both started doing some locums, which was great again, so because once again, I was getting into my mid-50s by that time, and I was starting to sort of check everything twice and this sort of thing. And I think that's what happens as you get older. You start to get, I think maybe you've just built up a lifetime of knowing the things that can go wrong. And in my job, sort of when things go wrong, they could go disastrously wrong. And I've been very lucky that during my career that I never had anything go disastrously wrong. And I thought, that maybe we should mid-50s is good enough time to get out. And then, as I said, I started just doing some locums. Yeah. But then I had a very serious car accident. Well, I was on my way up to Ramsey to work at Lloyd's up in ShopRite in Ramsey. Yeah. And had a serious accident on the way. Gosh. And that sort of completely changed my life again, really. So that was a major crossroads in my life.
Right. So how did it make you assess what you wanted to do from then?
Well, it wasn't a matter of making me assess. It was more what I could do, really, because I damaged the whole of my right side of my body. And I couldn't stand. And for years, I couldn't stand up properly.
Gosh.
So, of course, pharmacy was completely out of the question because obviously in pharmacy you need to be able to walk around and that sort of thing. So I literally couldn't work. And pretty soon realised I didn't want to anyway. So. Yeah. So
I guess returning to your music roots then, I suppose that gave you the opportunity to follow more vocational things, perhaps.
Well, of course, by that time, we'd opened the Centenary Centre in 2003.
Yeah.
When I still owned the pharmacy across the road.
Yes.
Gosh. And at that time, when we first opened, I was selling the tickets. I was booking the bands, getting the band to come over. When the bands came over, and if it was, I was working that day. I shouldn't really say this, but we get the band down. They'd set up and usually about 4 or 5 o'clock, just in the beginning of surgery. And then I'd be backwards and forwards because I was also doing the sound engineering and that sort of thing.
Yes, I remember you doing that. Gosh.
So I'd be over doing the sound check with one of the bands. I'd then get a phone call from one of the girls in the dispensary saying, "Can you come over and check something, please?" So I dashed back to the shop and I have to have a consultation or check a prescription or whatever it was. Yes. And then I'd be back. Then I say, "Okay, I'll see you in a few minutes." So I dashed back to the Centenary Centre. So
that's proper multitasking. That is efficient use of time. Yeah.
Probably too much, really, if the truth were known. But of course, that all changed after I'd had the car accident, and I managed to recover from that. Because it meant then that really I could sort of concentrate on playing myself, which I hadn't really sort of done. Well, I hadn't done full time since I was just after uni. Yeah. And then also, of course, sort of helped to be a volunteer at the Centenary Centre as well.
No, that's great. So you did piano from age 3. And I know you took up a guitar, didn't you? At some point.
I took up.
I know you as a guitarist, really. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was never a fabulous guitar player, really. I think, once the hormones started to kick in, I thought that probably I stood more chance of getting a girlfriend if I was a guitar player than a keyboard player.
Oh, is that a tip? Did it work?
No. That might be more to do with me than than anything else, to be honest. But yeah, so funny enough, my first guitar I bought when I was electric guitar. Well, I think it was about 13, something like that.
Gosh.
And then I bought a really lovely guitar. And to this day, one of the worst business decisions I ever made, in fact, probably the most worst business decision I ever made, was to sell that guitar. Because I bought it for £90.
Yeah.
It was a Fender Stratocaster. And I bought it in 1966, I think, when it was second hand. So it must have been 1961, 62, something like that. Now, those Fender Stratocasters of that age now probably worth 10,000, something like that.
Yeah.
So definitely the worst business decision I ever made.
Oh, well. You win some, you lose some.
Exactly.
Oh, dear. So did you have an idea then that you wanted to take that musical part of your life?
Yeah, I would have loved to have done. And I did do it sort of, I call it professionally. I mean, we more or less lived on next to nothing. But, for a year or so after uni.
Thin rock stars.
Scarcely. But, I had a lot of fun. We lived up in Scotland for a year.
Yeah.
We went up there because the drummer in the group I was playing at the time was a guy called Simon Fraser, who was George MacDonald Fraser's son, who was the guy who wrote all the Flashman books, who lived on the island at that time, lived in O'Brien. So I'd met Simon. He became the youngest judge in Scotland eventually, but he started off as a drummer in our band.
It's a small world, isn't it?
After that, I think, I did it for a year and I was sort of enjoying it, but we weren't really getting anywhere. And I thought I'd probably better start getting a proper job.
Yeah.
So me and another guy in the band migrated down to Birmingham, and that's how I ended up down in Birmingham. And
yeah. Where did you meet your wife?
In Birmingham. She was at teacher training college there, and I met her within a few months of arriving. And I think she must have been a bit of a groupie, to be honest, because she was going out with a guitar player who I'd met by that time, who was playing in a band in Birmingham.
Yeah, well, you can sort that out with her later when she listens. She's listening on the podcast.
Yeah, he's probably hit me when I recognised that.
Yeah,
but, she was actually living. She wasn't like this either. The way I met her, she and two other girls were living in a flat on Gillett Road. Now, anybody who comes from Birmingham will know that Gillett Road has a sort of slightly shady reputation, shall we say.
Oh.
And I hasten to add that my wife wasn't down that end. But that
I'm sure she wasn't.
That was right better. As I said, she was a student at the teacher training college.
Right, okay. So you got married quite early on.
We got married, within 18 months, really, yeah.
Oh, lovely. So she's not born and bred Isle of Man like you.
No,
so
she went to London.
Yeah, she was happy to come here, give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she'd been coming here anyway, so with my mum and dad living over here, we used to sort of come over a lot, and we used to bring the children over when they were the sort of firstborn and what have you. So it wasn't as if she didn't know what she was letting herself in for. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, Lizzie is one of the most sort of easygoing people that I've ever met, which just as well, really.
Yeah. Well, you have to be going full disclosure when you get involved with a musician, don't you? Let's face it. Okay, so you helped set the Centenary Centre up in 2003, and you're still a director of that, I think. Yeah. One of the only original one now. They'll either kick me out or I'll die soon. Anyway, they're all the rest. Well, I remember people like Eileen Hill being involved.
Eileen Hill, that's right. Eileen, she was terrifying. She
very efficient, though.
I was the treasurer, so Eileen was doing our books. So Eileen and I had more to do with each other than anything else. And yes, her eagle eye would never let me get away with losing an invoice or something. She
was very sweet. I was fond of Eileen.
She was wonderful. She was a great teacher as well.
Yeah, no, totally. Very passionate about what she did. Yeah. And Ernie Leese, is he still involved?
He's still involved to a small extent. He's not a director anymore, but he looks after, because he has a background as a fireman, He looks after our fire records for us, and that, and sort of make sure that sort of thing's kept up to date and everything. Which was wonderful, actually, that he still is involved. And then Keith Hewson was the chairman at the very beginning, who was one of the bank managers from the Isle of Man. And Keith, between Keith and Ernie, that place would never have got going, because Keith was the sort of motor behind the thing, always pushing it. And Ernie was the spanner man. He was the guy who actually did the work. I just sort of floated around and, come up with ideas of what we could do. But
that made it sound good.
It was really those two who, sort of got the place going.
For your part in that, I think I'd probably speak on behalf of a lot of people especially in the West. When I say thanks for setting up or helping to set up such a marvelous facility, because anybody who's been into the Peel Centenary Centre, it's an amazing project to have repurposed that hall, which would otherwise have fallen into.
Without the Methodist Church, they were wonderful, the Methodists, to give us the opportunity to buy it, because they wanted it to stay in the community, and they offered it to us for £120,000, which sort of ludicrous, really. The land alone is worth 5 times that, I would have thought. They were good enough to do it, and I think we've sort of made it work, really.
Yeah, it's a great asset to the community, although I suppose it's the funding and the ticket receipts, of course, will have come under massive pressure.
Fortunately, from that point of view, because we tend to lose money on a lot of the things we do, we're probably better off now.
Oh dear.
I often think of the Villa Marina as well, that they're not going to be too anxious to open too soon, because they're again,
my naivety never occurred to me that it would make money when being closed.
Money. We could have tribute bands on, I suppose, every week or something like that, and I've no doubt whatsoever that we could make a lot of money doing that. But I think that we decided a long time ago that we were going to sort of be as broad a church as we could.
Yes, I can certainly see that you've done that.
That, by definition, means that you're going to lose money, really, because nobody makes money out of classical music. Nobody makes money out of jazz. Nobody makes money out of
traditional.
All sorts of things, really. So I think actually, I know for a fact that our bank balance is pretty much the same as it was when we went into lockdown. So
good to hear. It's got a great chance of survival. That's excellent.
Our imminent demise.
Oh, good. Good to know.
From my point of view, of course, the big disappointment this year is Our Island, Our World.
That was a great debut festival last year that we were really thrilled to be invited to be part of.
It was wonderful of you to, frankly, with no reason to believe that it was going to be any good to you, that you just bought into the whole thing anyway, and made such a huge difference, because I think without a doubt, John Bowker was the star last year.
He was. Oh, the drumming, the communal drumming. You do know there's still a video on our website of that, which
marvelous.
It was a really great event. Yeah. I've got another podcast guest which I noticed is who was at that.
Oh, really?
They are going to interview them next week. Miles and Pippa from Noah Bakehouse.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Miles was at school with my eldest daughter, so I've known Miles for a long time, and somebody who I sort of really respect, because he's one of those people. There's a few on the island. There's Martin Brunchfile is another.
Yeah.
You've only got to phone them up, and almost before you've asked, they say yes. And they don't even know what they're saying yes to, but...
Thanks for the tip. Get him on next. Is that a recommendation?
Miles gave us a load of bread for a do that we were doing. I think it was a fundraiser thing, and we wanted to, I think we were giving out soup and bread, that sort of thing. I just phoned Miles up, and as I said, before I'd asked Omas, yes, whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that was so...
That's lovely.
So
wonderful. Good to know. Yes, try saying yes. Yeah, no, that's good. Well, I mean, thank you for sharing all that. I mean, I know it's disappointing about this year. I mean, we're still talking at the moment about some possibility of bringing John over, but I guess that's such an unknown.
It's unlikely because I'm not sure that the borders are going to be open.
No.
What I am planning, I'm not planning. I sort of have it buzzing around my head that I feel that I ought to try and do something. And one of the reasons why I'd like to do it is I've got I was given this film. It's a wonderful, wonderful film about the Gypsy Kings at home in the Camargue. And I'm desperate to show this film. I first saw it at an exhibition a few years ago. And at that time, I thought, I'm going to show this film in the centre one of these days. And then we thought we were going to expand the festival this year to 4 nights. And one of the nights I was going to have as a film night.
Oh, okay.
And I phoned these people up, these distributors up, and I said, I'd like to show this film. How much is it going to cost? And they said €300. And I thought, well, that's a bit stiff. And I said, well, I'm sorry, thanks very much, but, we're just a local, small, little charity-based thing. And he said, oh, don't worry, you can have it for nothing then in that case. So they sent me the download of this film. Yeah. And it is just absolutely wonderful. It starts off with this little girl, she's about 7 or something, dancing, some flamenco dancing with the guitar in the background. And you've never seen anybody dance so beautifully as this little girl. And after that, it just gets better and better. The film is wonderful. So I'm thinking that, I might try and do some local thing with local bands, local dance groups, maybe some global food. Few other bits and pieces like that, possibly. Just to
so much these days, and if lockdown lifting is so successful, I mean, it have to be nimble, I guess, to set it up so fast and get it organised so that they've got a chance to, if anything does happen.
Well, I've pretty well got everything organised for the festival anyway, really, and this is more or less what I would have been doing on the Saturday.
Sounds fabulous.
Well, I thought I'd do it in the cathedral grounds.
Yeah.
But it's just buzzing around my head at the moment. I haven't committed myself to do it. But, the more I think about it, the more I think it would be a good way to end the summer, really, so sort of to have...
Yeah. You'd have if wet in the Corran Hall.
Well, in the Corran Hall and the cathedral.
Yeah, you could. I remember seeing once it's just gone TT week. Some wag had written a notice. Red arrows. Do you remember the red arrows used to come in Peel, didn't they? Was it Tuesday nights or something? Red arrows, if wet, in Corran Hall. I thought that was hilarious. Okay, well, let me know what ultimately you decide to do. It sounds great. If we can be involved, obviously.
If there's any way we can get John over.
Yeah.
This is, I say I have. It's really an idea that John Shakespeare came up with. And he asked Bill Dale and myself what we thought. And that was to build a junk percussion workshop from stuff that was picked up off the sea. So talking about plastic tubing, all sorts of stuff. And that's something that I really would like to progress as well. Of course,
if he's not supplying the drums, theoretically,
that's right.
On a socially distanced base anyway.
I suppose we could always do it by Zoom or something like that. But
anything is possible.
Certainly.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. That sounds great. I mean, the other thing I just wanted to ask, well, perhaps we'll revert back to that later, future projects. But I mean, if you don't mind me asking, primarily I ask this when I meet people in my role as a financial planner, and it's kind of for you. How was money growing up? What's your kind of earliest memories? And
my earliest memory of money probably was my first job, which was working in Lipton's, which was well before your time.
Lipton's, I remember Lipton's in Ramsey.
I think this one was roughly where Burton's was in Strand Street. And that was my first job. And I have a feeling I was 12. I mean, It seems unlikely, but maybe child labour back in those days wasn't frowned on quite so much as it is now.
Yeah, sure.
But I have this feeling, and I seem to remember I got paid £1 an hour And basically, I seem to remember sitting out the back of this place, stamping the price on sugar, and then taking the sugar out and sticking it on the shelves. But I mean, I think that is my first memory of money. Really, I must have had a very idyllic childhood, I think, because I can't remember. I know my mum and dad weren't very well off.
And how did that shape your attitude? Do you think that your attitude around it?
The fact that my mum and dad weren't well off.
Well, yeah. I mean, did it encourage a decent, savings kind of mentality, or did you spend it all on sweets? What did you do?
I don't remember. I remember so little about my childhood. Actually, it must have been very uneventful. I think my mum and dad had a bit of bad luck, sort of early on. In that they'd bought a nice bungalow in Laxey. And in those days, there was no building societies or any of that business. So it was just on private mortgages.
Yes,
so
I know.
They borrowed the money for this private mortgage. And within 3 months, the lady they'd borrowed it off said, I need the money back. And, within a very short space of time. So they had to sell the house. And they lost money on it. And I know it took them years and years to recover from that.
No, there'd be no capital gains growth in property back then, I shouldn't think.
Oh, no,
what era was that, David?
That would have been about 1957, 58, something like that.
Yeah, that's very early.
It was a very hard time for my mum and dad. And I'm sure that sort of probably has... I don't remember it, of course.
No, and that sort of experience would have put off many others in a similar situation. You like you say, private mortgages were the only way. I know my in-laws, they had to do. They were both teachers, and private mortgage was the way. And I think it was probably. I mean, your mum and dad were ahead of the times for sure. This would have been in the mid '60s before they trod that path and took the risk. But by then there was a few more choices, I thought buildings in Onken in that stage must have been few and far between as well,
Yeah, well, this was in Laxey, and it was a lovely bungalow. I mean, it still is now to this day.
Yeah.
But it was obviously a huge blow to them, and it took them a long time to recover from that. And funnily enough, the way that they did recover from it was a lovely thing, because for years my dad had looked after this lady who lived in Onken, just down the road from my grand's house, and he'd gone and done a shopping for her, painted her house. She was living on her own and everything, and she died, and blow me down, she left everything to my mum and dad, which included the house and some money. Up till that time, they'd been they really had struggled a lot to get back from where that thing which had happened to them. So I was absolutely delighted, though. To complete that story, the lady died just at the time I was thinking of buying my first shop. My parents, bless them, had received this money after never having any money at all.
Yeah.
And within 24 hours, I'd asked them whether they could lend me some money to put into this business. And, that money hardly touched their bank account before they said, yes, of course. So they gave me £20,000, which was, Lizzie and I sold our house and made a bit of money on the house we were living in. And between the two of us, we got, between my parents and Lizzie and me, got enough money to buy this business.
Gosh. So the seed money partly came from your mum and dad. What a great opportunity.
Without mum and dad, it would never have happened.
This lady and his kindness and that community active.
That's right.
Yeah.
I paid them back within a couple of years, but to be truthful, they'd no reason to believe that I would. It was a marvelous thing that they did without a second thought, and it must.
Yeah, it's interesting that because it
was such a sort of wrench. For once, for them to have a few bob in the bank,
But that you understood that, and that's great, and that's partly, I'm sure, that's down to your psyche that you've been successful in what you've done. Oh, good. Oh, thanks. That's a lovely story to share that. So, of all the things you've done throughout your life so far, what things have given you the most fulfilment from a personal point of view? And
obviously, my family, I suppose, they're the things that they're what I'm proudest of. I've got 4 children. They're all either musicians, artists of one sort or another, managing to make a living by and large, and I'm intensely proud of them all. I've got 6 grandchildren. I'm absolutely sort of besotted with them. I haven't seen them for months, so can't wait to
go. Where are they? Are they on the island? Or
3 of them live in York.
Okay.
And only one of my eldest son, James, lives here on the island. But the other 3 are all in York with their families, which is great, really, because they're all sort of within a mile of each other. So they can.
Gosh, yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, that's right. It was really because my eldest daughter went to York Uni, stayed there, and the others sort of gravitated towards it because York is such a lovely city.
Yeah, beautiful.
And we've got a house over in York where we can go and stay with them, stay near them without having to actually stay with them, which is something I fancied and didn't want to do.
Right. Yeah. Can you just babysit?
Exactly. We do.
Yeah. And what about from a business or even an organisational perspective? What's been the most sort of fulfilling there?
I mean, I think from a business point of view, creating 50 jobs was definitely the biggest thing that I feel, sort of proud about, I suppose.
Quite right.
It was, I dearly loved all my staff, still do to this day, because most of the Isle of Man staff are still working down the road here in Peel anyway. Oh, and I think I was very proud that we hardly lost, nobody left in the 35 years that I was, sort of working. I always felt that the most important thing was to treat your staff well, and they're so crucial to your business. But I mean, apart from the sort of more selfish reasons, I mean, it seems like a proper way to live anyway. It annoys me intensely to see these CEOs earning, sort of hundreds of times the amount that their workers are earning.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, I mean, that sort of covered off my next question, which would be, for any aspiring business owner or entrepreneur, what would be your number one business tip? So treat your staff well.
Well, treat your staff well, but...
So maybe you could give an example of actually how you did achieve that, because treat your staff well, it means different things to different people. So what was it particularly, do you think, that you did?
I mean, I always... ever since the war, I mean, there tended not to be a sort of a national, sort of a living wage or whatever when I was working, but I always paid the staff well above what their contemporaries would be earning to start with. I always gave them as much time off as the business would afford. We used to try and we did a lot of social things as well. All sorts of ways, really, just treating, treating people the way you'd want to be treated yourself. It's not rocket science, is it really? No. I think one of the things that, as far as I was concerned, a tip. In those days, we used to have briefcases. Nobody has a briefcase anymore. But in those days, I used to have a briefcase. When I opened it up, I'd put this little sign inside and it said, "Do it now." And I always thought that was a good tip.
Yeah, it is.
It's so easy, to get, you leave things much, much better. You get everything done. And, so that way you end up going home at the end of the day and you haven't got a load of stuff that you haven't sort of done. Yeah,
sure. No, I think maybe the equivalent of that for not having briefcases, of course, but now we have our computers and it's email, isn't it? So what would have been in the briefcase, all those correspondence things are all email. So there's a similar one called the 3Ds with your email, and it's either do it, delete it, or delegate it. But it should be just one touch, so you're not just constantly looking at a full inbox.
That's marvellous. Well, I mean, that's much the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
much better than mine, really. But
no, it's not. It's not mine.
Mine worked pretty good.
No, for sure. Okay, so what do you do to relax these days and keep your life in balance?
I don't relax really. I'm not a relaxed person. I've always got something. If I'm not actually doing anything, if I'm just sitting, I'm thinking. I'm a plotter. I've got some sort of scheme in my head normally that will involve somebody else doing some work for me.
Well, that's good. It's a delegate one.
I'm good at delegate. I think anybody who knows me will tell you that. No, I don't know. As far as the festival is concerned, I find I'm a bit precious about that, actually. I don't like letting that go too much, which is, I keep getting told, because I've got some wonderful people as a sort of a team around me. Yeah. And they're always telling me, let me do that. And I must get to. But no, normally I'm quite good.
Do it nowadays.
And normally I'm just sitting there. I suppose listening to music is my main relaxation.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. What sort of music these days?
It depends on the day. Jack Doyle's shop, the record shop we've got on the island now, which is, I must give a bump to. It's under, Peter Louis.
Yes.
On the corner of Duke Street.
Yes, I do.
His record shop is down in the basement of Peter Louis. And a lovely guy, and I was there yesterday, and I bought the Ezra Collective, which is a sort of new jazz. They're mixtures of jazz, Afrobeat, all that sort of business. I like to think.
So you've got a decent vinyl collection then? Proper vinyl collection.
I'm a big vinyl person. Yeah. I like to think I'm down with the kids, but one of the things that I do think is important is so many of my contemporaries would consider the best thing they do all day is listening to a Led Zeppelin album or something like that, or maybe Eric Clapton or something. Yeah. I have nothing but respect for Led Zeppelin, but there's great new music happening, and I'd much prefer to be ferreting around on Spotify looking for something new. And
they're still doing a bit of new stuff. I don't. Gosh, it was a few years ago now, but talking at the Villa Marina, as it were, just earlier, Robert Plant came over with his band, and I went along.
Into my house afterwards.
Did he really? Oh my goodness! I'd never obviously seen a band like him play before. A bit too young from when they used to come over to the Isle of Man in the early 70s. I'd have been too young to go then, but he was amazing.
And at the Villa with Robert Plant,
I saw that. Yeah,
he was absolutely amazing.
I was.
Andy Kershaw brought him over.
Oh, did he?
And I was a friend of Andy's. He lived just down the road here.
Yeah.
And it was my birthday party that night, and they'd got nowhere to go afterwards. And Andy phoned up and he said, "Would it be all right if I brought Robert and the band back?" And it sort of took me about a millisecond, I think, to say yes, because frankly, that was about 1:30 in the morning, and the party was dying a bit by that time. There was about a couple of hundred people in this house.
Yeah,
the party was sort of dying a bit, and anyway, they turned up about 2:00. And the energy levels just leapt up, and it then carried on all night, and we had the most wonderful night. And I spent the night talking to the bass player in the kitchen. And
gosh, they're an amazing band.
They were wonderful
backing band, weren't they?
Robert Plant himself was chatting up every woman for miles around, so he seemed to be happy as well.
I suppose it goes with the territory, yeah. Can you tell me what you think the best things are about living in the Isle of Man?
I think the people, to start with. I think we are a wonderful community. And that immediately means that because you've got the people, it gives you the opportunity to do things. There is more music, for example, on this island of 80,000 people than there is in the whole of York, which has got 200,000 people.
Gosh.
So music is wonderful. The culture in general is wonderful. And I really must say what a fabulous job I think Culture Vannin do. And the fact that Brisha Madrill, the director, is one of my best friends is neither here nor there.
Oh, okay.
I just have nothing but respect for her and Chloe Woolley, the music specialist. I think they do an absolutely marvellous job at promoting the island.
Yeah, they do.
So the culture of the island, it's a beautiful place, obviously, as well.
Yeah.
But it's all down to the people. And from that, an awful lot of things come.
Yeah, and what about the challenges?
The challenges for the island. Well, I suppose the big challenge, and I don't for a moment imagine I'm the only person that said this to you, is we need young people who are going to pay the taxes to pay my old age pension. That is That's it, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it actually
enough
is.
of
Yeah.
Somehow or other.
So you got to persuade your kids to come back then.
Well, I think the government have to provide an environment to make it worth their while. My son-in-law, for example, developed an app for online legal services. That sort of business, I imagine, I'm not sort of an expert on business, but I would assume that sort of digital business would be a wonderful to encourage startups. I know that
innovations where it's at. Yeah,
I think you've got to do enough to make it worth people making that big move, because it's a big change, isn't it? Really, to come from, say, living in York to living over here.
Yeah, although I've heard this. There's a new hashtag for the Isle of Man, hashtag Peoplehaven, with us being the first part of the British Isles to lift lockdown.
Yeah,
that I've heard that there are folk in London, wealthy people in London, thinking that actually this isn't the place I've thought it was, having to self-isolate in a massive city where nothing's open. It's got a lot to be desired. So who knows? Who knows? Maybe get more residents that way.
I'm not one of those people, sort of, although I am one of the Manx sort of brigade, I suppose, in that I'm interested in Manx nationalist culture and that sort of thing. I personally do believe that there is plenty of room on the island for more residents.
Oh, yeah. Have you been to Jersey and Guernsey?
Never, but I've seen photographs, and
I have. I've ridden my bike in cycle races over there, and the biggest open space they have is the airfield.
Oh, goodness sake!
Yeah.
So, I would hate this island to get to that, but we've got a long way to go before we do.
We sure have.
Having said that, of course, the other challenge that the island's got is to provide suitable, affordable housing for these young residents who are going to come back, presumably with young families and not an awful lot of money. They might have great business ideas. But they're not necessarily going to be able to afford, the big houses that they've got, that we have over here.
Oh, they're building plenty. So
that brings the challenge of infrastructure, doesn't it? And making
absolutely, that's a major one.
Yeah. Peel, I think, has been swamped by the amount of people who've moved into Peel.
Yeah.
So from the point of view of the surgery, the schools, it's. I really think that. It should be the other way around. The infrastructure should come first, and then the housing.
Yeah, and I suppose the road from Douglas to Peel, those people travelling to jobs.
Yeah.
I suppose it's interesting to see from this, everybody working from home, how that will change the.
Yeah, well, let's hope that it can. My son's working from home now here in Peel, and means he doesn't have to get into Douglas every day. I'm sure. Well, I know for a fact that it's been very good for his work-life balance. He gets all the work done without that sort of 2 hours of hanging around on the bus. He used to get the bus every day.
Yeah, sure. So, what solutions and opportunities could you see from this?
Well, I do think that there must be business opportunities. I mean, you've only got to look at Zoom, haven't you? I think their share price has gone from something like 90 pence to £2.30 odd, something like that, in the last 6 months. How I wish that I'd have thought of it.
Yeah,
it was just there. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I have to say, I've been doing quite a lot of Zoom meetings over the last few months. And it's taken me a while to get used to it. But this morning, I think for the first time, I've actually felt quite relaxed about it. So it's either you, Sharon, or
no, you've had loads of practice.
You're very good at this job. But there again, I mean, I do think, and I suppose I'm not a lone voice in the wilderness, but I do think there is a big opportunity for cultural tourism on the island. I've mentioned Culture Vannin already, and the Arts Council again do a great job of with a minimal amount of money, I might add, in supporting arts over here. Scotland and Ireland, and to a smaller extent Wales, have managed to make a complete industry out of Ireland in particular. That's
sure.
sort of whole sort of Irish thing.
Who knows if we go down that sort of Viking heritage type thing that you mentioned before about John Shakespeare and his fire festival, that sort of thing.
I think John is a great example of someone who produces these great ideas and should be encouraged more. But if I put it this way, if festivals in Orkney and Shetland can make money, then I don't see why a decent festival over here can't make money. No. Now that we own apparently the steam packet, there should be the opportunity to have packages for that sort of thing. But cultural, not only, I'm not talking just about music culture, I'm talking about walking holidays, I'm talking about, in Wales, pilgrimage holidays have become very fashionable. And over here, of course, we have the most wonderful pilgrimage opportunities with the walking the keels, going around, the keels. What they're doing in Peel Cathedral, I think, is absolutely wonderful. It's just a sort of gem, So all these niche opportunities are, I don't think we're ever going to get the sandcastle, bucket and spade holidays back. But, for these niche tourism. Would you agree with me? Or
I'd agree.
Yeah. I think that's gone, and I don't. But I'm not sure that people even want that anymore. Actually, I think people want more activity-based holidays.
Yeah, sport, things like that. Yeah, the end-to-end mountain bike races are very popular.
Cycling, kayaking, we have so much to offer over here.
Yeah, and cycle networks could be a lot better, couldn't they? They're in the process of finishing the Peel to Douglas Heritage Trail, which is really good.
Yeah, that's coming on great.
A few more like that wouldn't go amiss.
Wonderful.
So, so what have you got planned next, David? I mean, you said to me that before we spoke today, you sent me a sort of a bio, and you noted at the end you're moving from your house in Peel, which is an old nursing home, down to Peel Prom, and intend turning your old house into a not-for-profit Christian retreat centre.
Yes, so, I can't tell you too much about it at the moment because the plans. We actually have planning permission, so that's obviously
a good start.
A big start, a good start.
Yeah, it's a lovely building. I know
the house.
Yes, I do. It's gorgeous.
And best of all, it has a wonderful atmosphere. It's, I've only got.
You said before about a party with 200 people. I guess it was there. Or the Centenary Centre.
We had quite an atmosphere the day after that, I can tell you. But I love the house, and has been a hotel in its time back in the day, back in the 1920s. So we thought that it was a good opportunity, and we have some like-minded people involved. As I said, it is a not-for-profit. It's not anything that we get any money out of. Yeah. But we hope that it will again provide another focus for a tourist.
It could quite easily be part of what you mentioned there about opportunities.
Absolutely. We hope so. We'll have to see how it progresses.
Exciting. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that, and we'll put mention of all the things you've mentioned, in the show notes. But no, that's great. Thank you. I mean, normally what I just do is just ask a few quick fire questions at the end, just as a point of interest for our listeners. So, what books have you read recently that you would recommend to our listeners? Source of inspiration. Philosophy, I don't know.
No, I don't tend to read those sort of books. I'm afraid it's all about music. I've reread recently Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, which is a wonderful book. I've just recently finished Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, which is really good.
Yeah.
So it's all about music, to be honest. Another thing, we were due to have Mark Radcliffe, the Radio 2 DJ, come to the centre in May, and that was obviously cancelled.
Yeah.
And one of the things we were going to do, I was going to do an interview with him about his new book called Crossroads, which was a wonderful book actually, and I had obviously been reading that to make sure that I was mugged up on it. But most of the time, I'm to be honest, as long as I got private eye, I'm more than happy.
Excellent, good recommendations. Do you have a favourite quote?
Yes. Well, off the top of my head, the favourite one is "I told you I was sick," which was on Spike Milligan's gravestone. Yeah. I also like Tom Waits is one of my big heroes, and as a lyricist, I consider him second to none. And I remember him once saying, "There are 3 ages of man: young, middle-aged, and looking good." That was good. And also I like, knowledge is knowing that tomato is the fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, we'll put all the details of where you can find all about Dave in our show notes for the benefit of our listeners. But you're obviously in the looking good age, Dave. So can I just say thanks very much for your for taking part in and supporting the project.
No, it's so true, that, isn't it? I can't tell you how many old people I sort of go to and say, "You're looking good."
Lovely. Yes. So, that's been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks.
I was a bit worried, I must say, but you've made it very, very easy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Island Influences. I hope you've enjoyed it. We work really hard to bring on great guests, but if there's someone you know whose story you'd like me to share, please drop me a line. Of course, the whole purpose of this podcast is to build confidence and trust in our community, the Isle of Man. And let's face it, we all know the Isle of Man's a great place to live and work, being incredibly cultural, rich and diverse. But it can receive far more than its fair share of criticism, much of it from anonymous sources, and it's all too easy to be negative, I think. I like the idea of being positive and supportive, since I always think solutions come from us in the private sector. Government should be there to govern, provide infrastructure, health, education and leadership, yes, but they're not the innovators. We are. If you really like to help this podcast receive a wider attention, perhaps in the rest of the world, and to drive like-minded people to the Isle of Man, please do share this with your family and friends and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. That will help it rank further up in the programme and hopefully reach more attention. So thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.